Okay, this is the fourth class in the Introduction to Ethics, our PH 205. This class is about social media and the effect of social media on teenage brains and college students. So in this class, my students are the experts. The person who wrote the book is somewhere between your age and my age, but he is really concerned about it. Um, he let his kids use social media and then he figured out, oh, this isn't real good for them. Let me say, as an old lady, I didn't want my kids to watch too much TV. We didn't have very many rules, but one of them was no more than 30 minutes a day on TV, which meant basically screen time. Now they would go to their friend's house and watch TV, but it's totally different. And it's different from social media because you go to your friend's house. My son used to go to a friend's house and watch sports. He's interacting with his friends. It's a social event. He's watching people do something that he himself does so he can identify with it. It's not celebrity culture. And so then you got to be naughty. I didn't ask them, did you watch? No, it was fine if they watch it over at somebody's house. The thing I noticed was um, when the TV was on, their little brains had been, they're always active, they're moving around, like Mr. Height says, right? They got to get outside and play, they got to interact with people. That was just the way I thought as an Aristotelian, because Aristotle says activities of soul in accordance with virtue. So I wanted my kids to have activities of soul in accordance with virtue. So they'd do sports, they'd interact with each other, they'd interact with their friends. They did not go on the telephone. They didn't, talk to friends on any kind of telephone. And the net result of that is that by the end of the day, you've been involved in many activities. You know that life is activity. It's not fantasy or phobia, it's activity. So it gave them a sense of how much you can get done in a day if you don't waste time. And so my kids have taken on pretty difficult jobs or they've taken risks and everything because they get a lot done in a day. So um, I was not a normal parent, but from the last lecture, you know that normal is toxic. So now they figure that out. Like I knew that. I have a 50-year-old, okay? So um yeah, I think I was right. My kids turned out really well. They don't, they're not lazy. They don't hide away in machines. They're active and they don't have excess phobias or fantasies. They're pretty down to earth. They know how to relate to other people. All the skills that you really want your children to have when they grow up. You want them to have empathy. That's another one that Aristotle said was important. Yes, to follow the golden rule, partly because, or mostly because, if they have these kind of social emotional skills, they'll figure out who to marry and they'll treat their partner well. They'll be good parents. They'll be good friends. They'll be good employees. They'll be good employers. They'll be good citizens. Like, what else do you want? So, aiming for activities of soul in accordance with virtue is what we should do. That is not what's been going on. And I've been aware of that. My kids are 50, 46, and 43, so they didn't, iPhones were not a thing till they were, I don't know, formed somewhere along the way, long gone from home. um, it didn't form their minds. Okay. My parents also grew up without TV. We got a TV when I was 10 and the screen was about this big, but they could not understand why I was so insistent on half an hour. And I told them, you weren't formed on TV. I don't want my kids' brains to be formed on TV because my parents read a lot and they memorized. They could sit and have conversations about history and literature and philosophy and politics just without even thinking about the fact that they could do that. They weren't impulsive. They weren't power hungry or money hungry. They were emotionally stable. And they didn't even realize, they had no idea what the impact of TV would be on a child if they were escaped into it. And I think it's a serious problem for Donald Trump. He thinks he is that TV character on Apprentice, and Sarah Palin thinks politics is about standing up in front of people dressed really nicely and talking about how much you love your family, because that's what it was on TV. I think TV had a really negative impact, but what is social media going to have over time is the issue. And um, you're the experiment. You're the yeah, okay. So I do want to start with some questions that go straight to you because you are the authorities in this case. What do I know? I don't know nothing. I know something, but what I know, you you need to get you need to think about your generation's conversation about this. As a teacher, I do try to structure everything so that students can't be on social media or cheat on ChatGPT. I I do everything I can to get their minds to become active, so they become reflective and they can step back and they don't get sucked in to all this stuff that's trying to take their mind away. Our culture is about who gets to have your mind, your capacity to step back and think about long-term goals. Set yourself a 20-year plan, a 30-year plan, and then aim for it every day. Just discipline, it's not discipline, it's just inspire yourself, right? It's inspiration. I can do this. I want to do this. If I get this much done today, I get closer to my goal. It makes you happy if you learn, if you just figure out what's worth living for. And also, if you grew up constantly active, then becoming active, but for the sake of a long-term important goal, like developing my talents in a way that I can really give back to society. Remember, rational ambition. You can't have rational ambition unless you know how to set long-term goals and you don't distract yourself and you don't let anybody make money taking your attention. All right, so that's my sermon. Now, what about you? What is your experience? If you don't have a phone, do you consider that a curse or a blessing? If you deliberately limited your use of your phone, do you think that has made you mentally healthier? And I've had students who told me, I had one last semester, when he was a junior, he realized he was addicted. Anytime he was in a downtime, he'd reach in his pocket for his phone. And he stopped himself and he trained himself. And he was happy. And he also was very alert in my class. He was always paying attention and he wrote some wonderful posts because he had been thinking. about his thinking, which is what philosophy is, he had a lot to say because this class is about what I've been thinking about. Yeah, that's right. Um, just like one of the earlier readings, have you ever read a book that's reminded you of yourself? This person knows me better than I know myself. That will never happen to you if you're addicted to your phone. It only happens if you let that deeper part of your psyche, the white matter, it's there. There are brain scans about the white matter, which is tied to our brainstem. It's not developing, it's being stunted or it's deteriorating. Hello. But you won't have, you'll be impulsive. You won't be able to set those long-term goals. It's if you really want to have a life that's, you can look back and say, I really did everything I could. And I enjoyed my life and I met the people and I did all sorts of stuff and I had some really dark times. I stumbled, but I pulled myself up. If you want to look back, you're going to have to shut off your phone and start thinking. But I hope this class will maybe at least convince you or motivate you to go on a different plane if you are addicted. I've had students who only use their phone for research, and you can tell that too. You can tell. You can tell them when they're sitting out there in the class, but you also especially can tell when they come in to talk to me about their papers. I had a student who, the first time she came, she was extremely anxious, just unbelievably anxious. And she wanted to write about anxiety and all the research. And she developed some confidence. And so by the time I met her, like the third time, fourth time, she developed some confidence. She had changed. But you really need to be aware that somebody is making a lot of money off of you by stealing your mind, your most precious capacity. But okay, have you thought about this before? But if you use it often, do you think you're addicted to it? Why? Like, what experience have you had that made you think you were addicted? Are you in denial about that? Which is, every alcoholic, they don't get well unless they admit they're an alcoholic. In AA, they have to go the rest of their life because they just don't have control of that particular desire. Do you have problems with sleep deprivation? Do you have trouble sleeping? Social, you have trouble interacting with people because you're on your phone so much? Trouble keeping your attention, which obviously college professors are aware that students, even if their phone is off, they're not paying attention. They're like, they're just thinking about it, which they're not digesting the material. Their brains are not being stimulated by the material, which is terrible. Or do you have problems with addiction? Do you find yourself constantly thinking about it and not being present with the people around you? This is really serious. So I hope you examine yourself. So just like with Aristotle's virtues, you'd have to step back and reflect what is too much, too little, the mean. What is getting too angry, not angry enough? What's the right level of anger, the appropriate anger? All of that requires reflection. So all I'm asking you to do right now is reflect specifically on your social media use, okay? Have you had conflicts with your parents about this? Have your parents tried to limit it? Are your parents addicted to their phones? Do you think his argument, and we'll get there in a second, but you already read it before class. What do you think of his argument that he really thinks social media causes mental illness because it messes with our brain structure, the way our brains evolved and the way they're supposed to develop in childhood, moving toward adulthood, just basic brain development. Okay. If it's true that our whole culture is destroying our brain structure so we can't reflect, then we can't simply create a new method for rewiring our brains. We have to change our culture, right? And this goes back to the question of health. How is your physical, intellectual, spiritual, emotional? How is all that health, that kind of health undermined by social media? What do you think you'll do as a parent? Will you limit your children's social media? Have you noticed that your grandparents were formed differently from you? I don't know how many of you have grandparents that are addicted to phones, but it's likely that they're not, because it interferes with their natural way of living in the world. But how would you describe the difference between each generation? And what were the advantages? Your grandparents certainly had more of what Haidt would call a normal childhood. And what about your parents? Do you think parents and Americans are in denial about how the culture is not only changing, but degenerating in serious ways? It's not that, oh, she's a baby boomer and I'm a Gen X or that's stupid. That is so stupid. It's not like the brain becomes completely rewired every 10 or 20 years. That's something every corporate CEO would love you to believe, because then they can sell you anything they want to, because you're a sucker. You'll sucker in for whatever's in front of your eyes. Very bad. Are social media companies in denial about the effect of their products? So you can write down what you think, what you know, if you studied this. Do you think they should be held accountable because they're selling a product that has been shown to cause mental illness? Should they be legally accountable, like tobacco companies? So the Surgeon General of the US, he has children, and he has raised the alarm. He wants Congress to pass laws. He also is, up on a soapbox about parent stress, that parents get stressed. The trouble is, he's a privileged man, and he's talking about it. What about poor people or middle-class people? It's not just the stresses that he goes through are, to me, a lot more by choice. You can just tell your kids to turn off their social media. But if you're poor, if you're middle class, you have a lot more stresses that you can't control, even if your kids don't even have a phone, which most of them do. But the stresses are so much greater. But anyway, fine. I don't like it when privileged people talk about stress. It just drives me nuts. Including myself as a privileged person, all right? You've got to get some perspective here. But again, that requires reflective thinking. It's a lot of white matter in the brain there. Should legislators pass laws to make it illegal for children under 16? That's what Haidt would want. Should there be any laws? And of course, we're duking it out because we're the pro-capitalist country and we're the pro-freedom country. So yeah, free to destroy your body, free to destroy your mind. Don't have the government help me out at all. It's crazy. We need that. Again, back to Aristotle. We need each other. Everybody needs to use the authority they have for the benefit of the people over whom they have it. If you want a social fabric, we are all completely interdependent, is the opposite of this obsession with freedom. That's complete denial. And rich people think it's great because they just get richer and richer. Have you ever noticed children, younger children that don't seem to be engaged in free play? Have you seen a kid that seems to be addicted to their phones? Okay. Yeah, what about what Haidt says about what children need to do in childhood? And was that what your childhood was like? Have you created your own brand, right, on Facebook, right? Did you create a brand? Okay, here I am, whatever. And all of a sudden life happens and you're not even that person anymore. And you have that brand there, like you're living a lie. I don't know because I never did that, but it just seems completely bizarre to me that you would present yourself as a teenager or a college student when life happens. I mean, there's going to be this huge gap between how you present yourself and what you really are. And to have to live with that seems like self-torture. Have you ever had the kind of anxiety that Haidt writes about? Okay, so this philosopher, of course, would be worried about this because philosophy is about naturally thinking about life. What is life? What's the good life? And that's something you think about in your spare time. It's a muse. You muse about it. And that's what our economy is trying to destroy, that very capacity. Because philosophers don't spend money. They don't care about appearances. They aren't into power or glory. They're not impulsive. They don't do anything that would make somebody else money or give them power. And so in our society, that's the enemy. Every once in a while, I'm sure there are people who think I personally am anti-American because I don't spend enough money on consumer goods. I think I'm a much better citizen because I don't, and because I try to teach students to be reflective, right? Like Socrates. I think Socrates was the best citizen. He got accused of corrupting the youth. I think what I do is I chose my thing I like to do best. I was ambitious. I got the degree because I thought I could this was the most good I could do to make the world a better place for my students, make my students' life better, my children, my grandchildren. So, but this is it. They, they, you know, deeper, we have to crawl deeper down the brain stem to your identity and get you addicted to getting attention from other people. This corporate Facebook CEO literally says that, right? He has no shame about it. He doesn't think it's going to destroy democracy, which it will, because democracy requires people to be reflective and self-controlled, as Aristotle knew, and generous. And it also goes back to Aristotle. If you remember, the two most basic virtues are self-control and courage because they're related to the most primitive drives deep in our brain stem, which is pleasure and fear. And so they are truly, self-consciously, deliberately destroying your humanity and driving us into a much more primitive way of living, one that is going to prevent us from being able to live together. It will undermine the social fabric. Our relationship to nature is deteriorating because we're so impulsive. We want fossil fuel billionaires to convince us that we don't have to change. This is all really bad. So just do some reflecting on your own experience with phones. And then I'm going to turn right now to the other, to the reading, just to the table of contents. So this is what you were asked to read, but let me just look at the table of contents with you. I would hope perhaps that you'd want to buy this book, but I do want you to think about in the future, throughout your life, if you would want to buy books that will help you become a better citizen. So I think the books that I assign can help you. I don't anticipate you'll buy a copy of Aristotle's Ethics. You might buy some Plato dialogues, but these are books that an informed citizenry would read and think about and then govern their lives in a way that would avoid the problems, but also set goals beyond just identified problems. What children, the decline of play-based childhood, is this, have you noticed this? Is this true of you? What children need to do, discover mode, the need for risky play, puberty, and the blocked transition to adulthood. So this has to do with helicopter parenting. My brother was like that. His kids went to college and he was on the phone doing sports scores just constantly. But I let my kids go, like, go off, seek, find out who you are. That was my thing. Find out what you enjoy doing. After college, they went out and did a bunch of other stuff for 5 years because their brains are still growing. And psychologists say that's a good thing. Try a lot of things. And then in your late 20s, you go, okay, this is what I want to do. I can figure it out. This is where I want to commit. And then they went to grad school. But there is this failure to launch, is the expression, because you're just stuck on your social media. The 4 foundational harms: social deprivation, you're not actually interacting with people; sleep deprivation, attention, and addiction. Why it harms girls more than boys? Because of their need for validation, because we live in a patriarchal society, males dominate. So women are wired to please men, to please. They also are wired to, if they have babies, to pay attention to what's going on. So they're wired to actually respond to outside signals. And then that just gets completely exploited by social media. Boys, on the other hand, have these video games and they get into this fantasy world of fake violence. And then we have all these wars. Does anybody know the difference between a war on a machine and the actual boots on the ground, blood and guts? We have a lot of people with PTSD, but I don't know. I don't know if either you never go to war and you really don't know what goes on, or you've been crippled by it and other people have no idea. One thing I think is really important. I don't know how they came to this statistic, but they said students who use social media are 40% less empathetic. Okay, the Greeks said empathy is really important for being able to govern yourself and each other and have a democracy. Everything that these gadgets are doing is the Greeks knew is the opposite of what you need to have a flourishing society. Then he does go to spirituality, which is just religious communities. You don't have to, he's an atheist, but it's a Greek view of the spirit. So Aristotle said, living for the sake of something greater than yourself, justice, truth, beauty, environmental protection. These are all spiritual callings and their goals, and you can structure your whole life around them. But he just talks about what goes on in churches is you learn to live for the sake of something greater than yourself. You're bound together as a group. It's like friendships based on virtue. So that's what churches are structured to do. Create a community of friends whose community activity is to volunteer, is to be generous, is to be even-tempered, patient, is all these virtues. You do it together as part of your community. But of course, social media degrades that too. Then his solution is that parents should get together and just not let their kids be on it. And so their friends can't be on it, so they can't be on it. Just change the culture and what governments can do, what schools can do, parents, because he really is worried about this. And he's got the data, right? He's a social scientist. I just knew it intuitively, and I knew it as a student of Greek, the study of the mind, according to the Greeks. This is the opposite of what's natural for us is the desire to understand. All right, so let me go back to the outline and okay. So let me go to the questions or comments after. Okay, here were some of the main points that I noticed. And when you write your posts, you don't have to have the same points that I do, but after you write yours, or you can compare what you thought was important with what I thought was important. Okay, Gen Z, okay, so he just thinks as soon as kids grew up with phones, they changed. Their brains got wired. Gen Z was the first generation to go through puberty with a portal in their pockets that called them away from the people nearby. It was really unhealthy. It's unhealthy if you get taught a religion where all you're supposed to think about is eternal life and you just completely detach from everything around you. That's not healthy. But this is just a money-driven, secular-driven, sex and aggression-driven alternative universe. Okay, they don't interact. So our brains are the product of evolution. Again, that's Aristotle. I talked about that. We're by nature, we desire to understand because the universe is understandable. Well, we got there by interacting, right? Interact with what's out there and testing, seeing if this worked or that worked, figuring out the cause, passing on the stories to the next generation. But social media just takes that all away from you. The rewiring of childhood. Okay. So they're overprotected. They can't act autonomously. So children are supposed to have challenges. I heard Steve Jobs' widow said that she and Steve Jobs was an orphan, or he was adopted. And he has a pretty rags to riches story, actually. But anyway, they wanted their kids growing up middle class. So the kids went to public school because she said, I want them to have all those teenage experiences like every other teenager has. Well, hopefully they'll turn their phones off so they can, even though their dad created the phone in the first place. But it's funny. And I know that there were a lot of people who invented a lot of this online stuff who didn't want their kids anywhere near it. They would send their kids to schools like the Waldorf school that had no technology at all. They were the ones that invented it because they know, that in order to invent it, they had to be very creative and not plugged into it. So they didn't want their kids plugged into it. And okay. So in the real world, you have social interactions that are embodied, synchronous. This is where, again, this class is asynchronous. So it's not, it doesn't, stimulate you as much as if you were in a classroom, I think. One-on-one, lots of communication, lots of interaction. They are motivated to invest in relationships and repair rifts, right? So they develop social emotional skills. Do you have these kind of relationships, or have you substituted it for online relationships? Do you think it's healthier? Has it ever occurred to you that this is not healthy? Now, liberal arts colleges like Lyon were created so that students would come and they live in this community where every aspect of their life gives them another opportunity to cultivate their humanity. You have many, many opportunities for studying different subjects, different teachers, joining clubs. Many of you are in sports, just interacting with a whole lot of different people and a whole lot of different goals. That was liberal arts, and that was tied to Aristotle and the Greek view of the good life. It's an embodied life. The person of practical wisdom makes the right decision in a situation. They aren't online fantasizing about decisions. They aren't online complaining about somebody else's decisions. They're living their life and making choices. Okay. Do you think this happens at Lyon? That he and a researcher said they went onto college campuses and they thought the college teachers were teaching students to catastrophize, make everything a catastrophe, black and white thinking, emotional reasoning, and that could actually be causing students to become more depressed and anxious. So you can think about that. I teach students, right? Strength of mind. Keep the end in view. Keep your idea of the good in front of you and organize your life around it. So, but you can think about that. You have lots of different classes. Okay. All right, for fun. So what does he recommend? No social media before 16, phone-free schools. much more unsupervised play, right, and independence. 2022, about half of teens were online almost constantly. That's terrible. They've taken your mind away. Even when they're just doing something in the real world, their attention is worrying about some event in the social world. That's terrible. Okay, this is Epictetus, the power of ideas. This class is going to explain the power of ideas over time, because we start out with a lot of problems in our society. And then we go to the ideas that are behind why we have it structured the way we do. Okay. And all the self-help books say you have to keep the end in mind. And that's why I ask you to write papers. The papers you write are about that. Like, how do you think the society has been corrupted? How do you think the ideas from the past are affecting us now? And your final one, of course, is health. And it's an idea about health, and it's an idea about how you want to be a healthcare provider. What kind of provider do you want to be? You have to envision that. And then you have to structure your life to get it. Okay. Some of the ideas that are driving the change. Success means wealth. So the social media companies should be honored, not demonized. And Fox News, Robert Murdoch, should be honored rather than demonized for destroying public opinion and just promoting denial of climate change. So the idea of freedom, the idea of success, the idea of freedom, this is a corruption of ideas, and they're powerful drivers of our culture. Should children be free to do whatever they want? Okay. So the surge of suffering, has there been a constant conflict between you and your parents, or do you know that? The parents say that the children have lost their childhood. They're depressed, anger, lazy, withdrawal. Parents feel trapped. What should they do? Okay, internalizing disorders versus external. How you treat other people, whether you take risky behavior. Fear is a main driver in people's lives and in our political life. The politicians appeal to fear. Advertisements appeal to fear. Right. Okay. What children need to do: verbal play, social skills. Okay, free play. Discover mode, the need for risky play. That is, back to Aristotle. All human beings by nature desire to understand. So they want to discover things. Build up resilience when you fail. Lots of stories of people say the best thing that happened to me was I lost my job or I failed. So that's how you learn resilience. You just get up the next morning and you got to do something. So you do the next thing. You develop an immune system, right? A psychological immune system, so you can handle setbacks. That's really important. Buddhism emphasizes this. Okay. I mean, these things just keep repeating Aristotle. I'm sorry. The social development, you need to learn the art of friendship and doing things together. Then the competitiveness of college admissions is not natural. In order to get into a good college, kids are just pumped up with taking all AP classes, and in the summertime they have all these enriching experiences. I remember I was in Greece and there were some students who were there for 10 days, I think, and they had 3 teachers with them, an anthropologist, a photographer, and probably a historian who taught them all the stuff related to Greece. And it cost, I think, something like $7,000. And so I figured you could spend $35,000 on your children's enriching experiences every summer. But that's to get into a good college, right? Oh my gosh. And you just don't give kids a chance to just free associate, be on their own. Okay, breakdown in adult solidarity. Okay, all of these points that he makes about the corruption of our emotions, really, and the failure to make that transition from caring about yourself to finding something greater than yourself that you really want to dedicate yourself to. Okay, so you have to have right kinds of experiences at the right time. And yeah, you have to how to become an adult. There's 3 phases. You separate from your parents, then you transition. You're led by adults other than your parents, and a lot of people at line, right? Coaches, people on the staff, faculty, they play that role of and loco parentis. They guide you through the next stage of your life. And then reincorporation. So then you become yourself as an adult, but the community recognizes you for who you are, not you as the daughter or son of so-and-so. You are your own self. You're a member of adult society. So, okay, this is the one about, oh yeah, just more stuff. Okay. I think that's probably enough. Some of this, I think the spiritual elevation is a chapter that I didn't have you read for today, but we'll get to it later. So I think that's it for lecture number 4. Again, you write in your post, you read it, you reacted to it, you answered some of the questions I asked, you reflect, and then you have a final takeaway. Do you think you want to include this on your final paper about what is health? Do you think social media is a serious threat to our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, and political health? Because, of course, we also have this terrible problem with polarization. Okay.